Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's so good to be back talking to you about this wonderful world of composing and music because the outside world is really scary. Anyways, I'd like to share my composing process and how to be a creative and to actually meet deadlines and create art consistently. Because if there's one thing that I learned from music school, which I just graduated from, is that you have to really have a disciplined process to get work done in time and to have a solid body of work that you can rely on so that when you're a professional in the real world that you actually have something to show people. And that's a whole nother video, but let's get into my process. So I'm just finishing up a commission behind me actually for a youth choir that I just got a few weeks ago, and I'm on the finishing stages of it. And I was struggling to write it at first because I was sort of trying to do everything at once. I was trying to create this idea of a piece that I had in my head in its entirety on the first day, and I was never getting anywhere. I would just scratch ideas off, and it was really lackluster. It had no structure, it didn't have any bones behind it. And then this happens every time I write a piece, is I just forget how to compose. It's something that other creatives can probably relate to, is just this idea of reinventing the wheel every single time you start a brand new piece or commission. So in this bout of desperation, I turned to YouTube, because that's what I do to procrastinate. And I came across this wonderful YouTuber named David Vess, who is a composer and getting their doctorate degree right now at University of Miami. But they had this really cool video on the composing process and what they do, and they broke it down into these 4 steps, the 4 Ds really. And that starts with the dreaming stage, the drafting stage, the definition stage, and then delivery. And we'll break all these down, and I refer you to that video. It's actually linked up here if you want to check it out, because he explains each step much more brilliantly, but this is how I personally implemented it. So the dreaming stage, this is where you're just getting the first idea of the piece. You're getting some light sketches and trying to manifest what the mood or character of the piece is and for what purpose. And for this commission, I had that vision, which made this dreaming stage a lot more clear for me, but it's not getting anything solid down now. It's just sort of getting inspired to create the piece that you're about to create. And this is where I wrote down some light sketches by improvising at the piano. That's usually how I start most of my pieces, is just from noodling around, and that gets the ball rolling in my head. So after some light sketches, I begin to develop some of these ideas using motivic development techniques, which I talked about in a previous video. I tried to look at the words that I have in front of me for this vocal piece, and I try to create musical motives and gestures that go well with the text. This is called text painting, and it's a technique that composers have used for hundreds of years. After I start getting all of these ideas onto paper, this is where the drafting stage comes. Now, the drafting stage is defined by getting your musical ideas sequenced in a timeline so that you can have a finished piece of music from start to end, and you can kind of get this skeleton of what the piece is. And this is a very relieving aspect of the creative process, and it often takes the longest. This is the stage where you're tearing your hair out of your head, you're in your underwear late at night, and you're wondering why you ever became a composer in the first place. Most of the meat and the craft really happens in this stage. This is where the magic happens. And after a few days to weeks or even months on the drafting stage, getting all the ideas to a structure and having a defined structure prepared ahead of time is super helpful. This idea of pre-structuring my pieces has only been fairly recent. It's like if an architect was building a house, they wouldn't just guess on how the structure would stand on its own. There has to be a plan, there has to be a foundation for you to build your piece off of. So for me, this piece was going to be ABA because it was going to be shorter and very motivically driven, so the A sections at the beginning and end repeat in some ways. So that's enough structure for me to get all these ideas drafted out. And I recommend that you have some sort of formal structure or a duration to get you started, so you aren't just staring at a blank page the entire time. Okay, after drafting, I have sort of a piece put together. There's a lot of missing holes and things that I might take away or add, but we go on to the definition stage. This is where you sort of shave off little pieces of it to make it its unique character. In the definition stage, you are defining the piece itself. You're giving it its unique character. You're just slightly shaving off some pieces that you don't like, or maybe adding or reinforcing sections that you do like. And the definition stage is kind of where you're headed towards that final bar line, and it's manifesting itself into the piece that you imagined it to be. And for both the drafting and the definition stage, I'm still at the piano. I start sketching by hand, or rather on a tablet, on blank staff paper, and I'm writing all these ideas down. There's pages and pages of little sections of the piece that I begin to stitch together, and then at the definition stage, towards the latter half, I'm starting to notate it onto music notation software. These days I'm using Dorico. Let's go. And how it actually looks like a piece of music, because it's all sequence from beginning to end, more or less, and it's in a fixed medium that's easy to read, and you can actually play through it yourself if you have the ability to. It's really satisfying to be at this stage in the process where you have a piece that you can call its own. The definition stage may not be as long as the drafting stage, but this is where you are making sort of last minute changes, and that sort of segues into the delivery stage. After you finish that double bar line, the delivery stage is where you make it a commodity. In the delivery stage, you're making the piece shippable and marketable. You're fixing notational issues, which are actually objective things that you can fix, and I recommend Elaine Gould's Behind Bars if you want to up your notation game. But you try to make it look as professional as possible. The layout of the page, the score, and the parts are very well formatted, and they look professional as if they were published. And you're comfortable enough to give this to real players to perform in the real world. So it's a very in-depth and granular process to fix little tiny things to make it more readable. But at this stage, you're pretty much ready to hand it off to whoever is going to perform it, or you're going to throw it online, make a YouTube score video, and share your music with the rest of the world. Nailing it down to these 4 phases really helped to create a scientific process to this really mythical world of composing. Having this process alleviates any of that writer's block that you think you have. It makes it so replicable to create all sorts of music by having this defined process from beginning to end. You're not staring at the horrible blank page for hours trying to create this masterwork. You're scientifically building it up from the ground up by building that firm foundation and then adding the finishing touches at the end. Having this process has been a game changer for my composing productivity, and I hope to continue it into the future, and I hope you do too. Now, some additional tips that help me get into the flow state for this specific commission and for a lot of the pieces that I've written include the following. Number 1, have no distractions while you're working. And I did this by turning on Do Not Disturb on my phone, or shutting the phone off entirely, or sometimes leaving it in another room. It can be so distracting, as we all know, to have access to social media right at our fingertips, but really that has no place in the creative work zone as it is. So whenever I was in that practice room, I just threw my phone far away as I could, and I just dug straight into the work. I had access to my music building, which had all these practice rooms during the summer, and I still have tab access somehow. So this is where we got most of the work done for the commission. This is where a lot of the magic happens for a lot of composers. It's in the practice room. And I sat here for a good week or so doing the drafting stage every single day without fail. For my time block that I allotted on my calendar, I was going to sit down here. I had my iPad right here where I would handwrite the sketches, and then I had a music stand here with my laptop for the later stages where I started to notate and engrave everything on the computer. But you wouldn't believe how this small sterile practice room forces you to just get into the flow state. It took me a long time to figure out what worked for me. I always tried to deck out my home setup with all the right equipment, had all the right intentions. It's just so distracting being at home when you're writing. So going to a separate location encourages you to get work done, whatever works for you. But this was my haven pretty much for the entire commission. And towards the later stages, when I was at the delivery stage, when I was engraving everything and preparing the front matter and all that stuff for the delivery of the piece, I just could work at any like coffee shop or anything to do that, because I didn't need to be actively writing music. So the place of ritual can change. It doesn't have to be in one place for the entire process. I just find that when I'm actually doing the craft of composing, I need to be completely distraction-free in an environment with a piano. Just find a location where it's away from your bed, it's away from any potential distractions, so you can work completely uninterrupted. Lots of good stuff here. Okay, back to the video. Now, part of my routine and ritual for composing music includes having access to caffeine because I'm an addict. So just sipping on a nice iced coffee while I work on a piece is just part of my ritual, and it gets me into the zone. It's a trigger of sorts to get me to do deep work. I had access to water, which was very good to stay hydrated to counteract the caffeine. And then I had access to a bathroom. So yeah, I have a weak bladder. This video is going off the rails. So time blocking also was a big part of my process. So this is where you have your calendar and then you dedicate creative time to be from this time to this time, and you stick to it and you respect and you honor that time every single time. And if you don't, then you're not going to get anywhere. So I dedicated slots specifically in the morning to get specific things done, and I defined what I was going to do ahead of time. So for example, on Monday I would take a look at rehearsal A through rehearsal D, and then in that section of that piece I'm going to be taking a look at voice leading in the vocal parts, and I'll play through the piano accompaniment to make sure everything is idiomatic and plays well. And having that granular section to look at eliminates the overwhelm that you can get by just looking at the entire piece as a whole. In addition, I had a stopwatch, or you can even have a timer to count down how much time you have left. But for me, I was getting into the flow state. I didn't need to give myself like 25-minute blocks. I just kept on going for as long as I could. And at the first few sessions of this commission, I would only do like an hour and a half. And then as I graduated, I would do like 2 hours a day probably, which some may say is not enough, but I know my limits, and that's about as much as I can do without getting completely burned out. And if I had commitments earlier in the day to worry about and I couldn't compose first thing, I would just do it as soon as I could afterwards, because for most people you are the most creative and you have the most willpower earlier in the day, and it sort of wanes towards the end of the day. So as soon as I could, I would start working on my piece every single day as part of my ritual, and you wouldn't believe how game-changing that was. And I encourage anyone who is doing this sort of creative work, or any creative work in general, is to define your workspace and to stick to a ritual and honor the time that you set aside for it. It's that easy, it's that simple. So yes, I hope that sharing my creative process for writing music was insightful in some way, or you learned a thing or two. just putting a process and a scientific method to this mythical craft that we do. I think that just is beneficial for everyone, so we don't get bogged down by writer's block and all these things. So I hope to create more videos this summer as I have a lot more free time. I hope to share my findings and experiences that I had in my undergrad degree, and as I move on to my master's degree for music composition in the fall, which will be a great source of content, and I can't wait to share it. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below, and keep writing.